I'm 69 years old. As a profession, I practice law downtown St. Paul. This is my 40th year. I came to practice law because I was painting houses, scraping paint above my head in 90-degree weather with my college degree, and thought I can do better. And I actually been admitted to law school a few years earlier in 1969 and decided instead to stay at the U and get a second undergraduate major. And by then it was 1974, and I wasn't sure I could become a lawyer for a variety of reasons, but I figured I needed some profession to fall back on other than an econ degree. And so I decided I'll go to law school, and if they don't let me become a lawyer, I'll find something else to do with the skill. And so I became a lawyer because my econ degree wasn't doing it. It qualified me to paint houses in 90-degree weather. We really liked houses in this neighborhood because the houses were big and we didn't have to move our ladders too far. From job to job, moving the ladders was a pretty major effort. And so 40 years later, here I am practicing law. And the stuff I've done as a lawyer has been haphazard, unplanned, in large part. When I was a pup lawyer, I did a lot of criminal defense work. I worked part-time as a public defender and tried a variety of cases, from window peeping to drunk driving to prison riot to murder to kidnapping and several other things. And then probably 20 years ago it morphed. And I got more civil work, medical malpractice, made a mark in that regard, for better or worse, although I've represented more doctors than I've ever sued. I've represented a lot of medical professionals and other professionals with licensing boards and other problems like that. And I've always had some oar in the water politically. Last fall was when the Native Americans in North Dakota, the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and the Cheyenne River tribe, were fighting the Dakota Access Pipeline. I actually got a call from two different women about one guy. Women that didn't know each other. Winona the Duke, everybody knows, and is one of my heroes. And another friend from Ely, and both of them said, "You got to represent Charlie Thayer. He was just arrested up in south of Bismarck there." And so I ended up spending weeks in North Dakota. Boy, it gets cold up there. Just a windswept prairie, even in the autumn. Even before the snow comes, it can get cold up there. And so my professional practice has always been a little bit whatever came in the door, and somehow it's been good to me. I've won more than I've lost. And it has permitted me to do all sorts of other things. I've raised 3 good, strong daughters. We just came back from our 5th week-long trip on the Salmon River in Idaho. We kayaked and rafted probably 110 miles, I think, is the trip. But it's still something that they do. I've kayaked and paddled all over the world now, from Tibet to Honduras to Costa Rica to Ecuador to whatever, so I'm proud of that. I hitchhiked across the Sahara Desert, and I studied for a term of law school in Ghana, and when I finished that, I hitchhiked across the Sahara Desert. And so I'm now free associating. How did I get to where I am today? I associate that with my profession. I'm a lawyer, but I've always been, I like to think of myself as somewhat of a social activist. And so there was a period of time where, being a felon, I was sort of a pariah. People didn't associate or want to associate with me. In more recent years, that's been forgiven. And so for small organizations, I've been able to contribute as a board member. I'm chairman of the board of Save Our Son St. Paul, which is an umbrella group for a few individuals, elders in the African American community, primarily Melvin Carter Jr., a retired cop who's a superlative private social worker. Every week he's at the adult detention center teaching. There isn't a kid, at least a black kid, that comes through the adult detention, or, no, excuse me, not adult, the juvenile detention center, that isn't met face to face with Melvin Carter Jr. And gets some parenting. And he's been doing this for decades. I'm proud to be associated with that. I'm on the board of the Hmong American Education Fund. A client of mine suffered, the Hmong family suffered the death of one of their family members in a medical mishap, and I represented them, and they took a substantial part of the settlement and started the Hmong American Education Fund, fashioned after the United Negro College Fund. And so I get to be on boards like that. I'm on the fundraising board for Southern Minnesota Regional Legal Services, which is the civil legal aid for the southern half of Minnesota. They do yeoman service for thousands and thousands of poor people around the state of Minnesota, and I can be proud to say I'm in their campaign for legal aid, and I have been for decades now, and I do volunteer attorney work for them. And so I like, I'm an average guy insofar as, I got another house there that looks like every other house, and I got 3 cute kids, and I go downtown to work every day. But I've been privileged to lead a very interesting life, part of which is its genesis back in the days of the old West Bank and Dinkytown, and the days of sex, drugs, rock and roll, and the revolution in the late 60s and early 70s. We had a lot of fun back then.
Are you still the same guy?
In a lot of ways. I mean, of course we're all different. Of course I would do things differently today. It's just like, I have a felony on my record. Would I do that again? Maybe not. But I'm still fundamental. I like to think I'm still a moral person, and we believe we were moral persons. People who wanted to explore new ideas and were willing to change, or at least challenge root ideas as to why things are the way they are and how things can change and whether things can change. So I like to think I'm still there. I'm not as much of a involved activist. I still go to demonstrations. I still believe in demonstrations. I still believe you gotta participate. Shoe leather is still part of social movements and an important way to vote. But I'm probably more interested in electoral politics today than I was back then. I do believe that representative democracy is as good a system as we're going to get for a while, and we got to participate in it. And so I'm, privileged to be friends with people like Keith Ellison, who are out there mixing it up, and Sam and Sylvia Kaplan invite me to their parties, and so I like to be in that mix. They like me because I give them $50 too sometimes. But am I the same person? I'm still sort of a busybody insofar as I'd like to be an activist, because I thought we'd get 10 minutes, and my 10 minutes was going to be to talk about the building on 6th and Cedar in downtown on the West Bank, which is now an empty lot, and it's one of the great tragedies of the progressive movement. I hate to say it, I can't remember if it was 529-seater or 539-seater, but it was a building that housed more progressive organizations, more progressive thought, more progressive organizing and enthusiasm than any other location that I'm aware of. And it was just a funky little wooden 2-story building. The ground floor was a fellow named Marvin Davidoff. Did you get Marvin Davidoff before he died?
No, I tried, but didn't succeed.
Okay, well, he was one of my heroes and a dear, dear friend. His ashes are in my basement. Ask Joyce Yu that story. Anyway, Marv was a classic old beatnik from the 50s who came out of the service as a pacifist and a nude model who became a one of the first freedom riders in the early 60s, and was a storyteller par excellence. That's why he'd give me 8 hours, man. He could tell stories about the freedom rides that were so fascinating. He had this mellifluous voice, this good booming voice, and he could talk about visiting somebody's house in their staircase and make it sound like he was at the Lincoln Memorial. He was a good guy. He had at this 539 Cedar, the first floor, his business was Liberty House. He sold handmade goods made by poor people, generally black women from the Delta of Mississippi. These were dolls and I don't know, whatever else. He also used it, and so he made a minimalist income. But he also used that space for his own organizing efforts, and hopefully you'll get somebody who was a core person of something called the Honeywell Project, because the patina of everything from the 60s and 70s obviously is painted not just by the civil rights movement domestically, but by the Vietnam War internationally. And Marv started something called the Honeywell Project because the Honeywell Corporation, a then local headquartered corporation, was making anti-personnel fragmentation bombs. And so on the first floor, you start out with the entrance of selling handmade goods by poor Delta folk from Mississippi, the offices of the Honeywell Project. Upstairs at 539 Cedar was the 100 Flowers newspaper. Have you interviewed Eddie Feline?
He's on the list.
He's a character. He's a wonderful man, a sainted man. He has been doing people's journalism forever. And so he and another cadre of people started 100 Flowers newspaper based upon one of the Mao Zedong sayings, let 100 schools of thought contend, let 100 flowers bloom. And so ergo the first hippie underground newspaper in Minnesota of the era was this 25-cent 100 Flowers. That was upstairs at 539 Cedar. Also upstairs was Twin Cities Draft Information Center, TICDIC, TCDIC. Have you interviewed Don Olson? Don's a sainted person. You've probably heard his voice because he's for years had an hour-long program on KFAI. I'm going to see a bunch of these guys that I will name for you on Sunday because sort of out of all this activism, I became a felon. I was arrested for being at midnight inside a draft board in Alexandria, Minnesota by the FBI. And so this was not even a central part of my being at the time. It's become a central part of my identity since then. But getting back to 539 Cedar, so you had Liberty House, Honeywell Project, 100 Flowers newspaper, Twin Cities Draft Information Center. Out of that morphed the Military Advisory Project that I can't remember what it was. The co-op movement. Minnesota has had the most wonderful co-op movement that Seward and Wedge and stuff all came out of. Well, the first sort of storage place after using Dean Zimmerman's porch for storage of stuff was in the back of that building. And I wish some of these other people were around. Warren Hansen, have you interviewed Warren Hansen? Warren Hansen was a young guy, worked at 100 Flowers newspaper. Out of that started the West Bank CDC, Community Development Corporation, which became a major mover of community organizing and housing of the era. He now heads the Greater Minnesota Housing Federation, and I think helps administer $20 or $30 million worth a year. The major subsidized housing fund of the state of Minnesota is run by this old 100 Flowers hippie over in St. Paul. He's out of town this weekend. I won't see him. The reunion we're having is of the Minnesota 8, this group that I was arrested with a group of us were arrested in various draft boards in middle of 1970, trying to remove and destroy their records. 8 of us were arrested and became known as the Minnesota 8, clever. And we're having a reunion on Sunday. But the basement of this building became, and it was a funky basement, unfinished. You know, the old limestone walls that just leach crap out, whatever. I mean, we're lucky there was a poured floor in the basement, but that became the defense committee for the Minnesota 8th. And there were other sort of infant organizations and infant events that took place in that building. So to the extent that we talk about the West Bank as an incubator of political thought, of progressive movement, of leftist politics, of anti-war events, of civil rights organizing, that building was a central part of it. And the tragedy is, all of a sudden it got bought up. You're going to talk to Steve Parliament and Joyce Yu. They were very crucial to the anti-Heller-Siegel, anti-Cedar Riverside organizing, where these were the people that were going to just tear out the heart of the West Bank and turn it all into some sort of plastic and steel thing with no green space. Those people were the landlords of 539 Cedar. They all of a sudden evicted all the lefties, claiming that there were other big building plans. And suddenly, so all the lefties, I think I was in prison at the time that this happened, so I wasn't around resisting. Other people can give a better explanation. But it's total subterfuge and lies that the landlord evicted all these lefty organizations and tore the building down. Never built anything. It's still an empty lot at 6th and Cedar. And it's just one of the great tragedies that this center of thought, this center of enthusiasm, this center of sexual revolution that just disappeared insidiously. So that was my 8 minutes about 539 Cedar. I'll think of 10 other things later on. But that was a magnificent. It was an ugly wooden building, but it was a magnificent structure because of the soul that it had and the inspiration that it gave to so many people. I remember when we had the student strike at the University of Minnesota after Nixon invaded Cambodia. Over the weekend, that was the building in which all the lefty organizations had their meetings about what we were going to do on Monday morning. I remember handing out assignments as the Mimeo machines were going. Those old Mimeo machines, people don't know nowadays we have photocopy machines, but back then you had to type into this sort of layered, it wasn't a piece of paper, it was a series of sheets of paper where the typewriter cut the letters into it such that there was then a membrane in between, and you'd put that on a drum. And the drum had ink in it, and with each turn, the hope was that ink would just leak through and produce what was typed. There no corrections were possible, but 539 Cedar was full of these Mimeo machines, and there were a few literally ink-stained wretches. You know that phrase about people who are in the publishing world, the writing world. They were ink-stained wretches. The few old stoner hippies who could fix those machines were so valuable because they ran constantly. George Crocker, who now runs the North American Water Office with his wife Leah out in Lake Elmo, was one of the ink-stained wretches. Jim Dombrowski, who I think can now say actually successfully ripped off a draft board and is coming in town this weekend. He was one of them. So now I'm free associating. Hopefully I might come around more stuff in the building because there was more stuff that happened.
Well, you press a lot of keys from my own memories. Not that
So how old are you?
building.
You're not that old.
I'm 65.
You are there.
I'm close.
All right, you're getting there, old man.
I didn't have either the temperament or quite the age to get arrested, but I remember a lot of stuff, and I could tell you some other buildings that need a brass plaque too. There was a tremendously odorous bar. I think near where Sergeant Preston's is now, which had the Youth Emergency Service up above it, which is what happened when those hippies, had taken too many odd chemicals in strange mixtures and now thought they were animals from outer space. And, I spent some hours talking to them at like 3 in the morning. And Many Corners, which was its own kind of strange enterprise. The richness again. By the way, I also have a mimeograph machine, vintage, Spirit Master, in my basement. My spouse finally persuaded me to get rid of the printing press, but
Gutenberger.
yeah. But I have I know of what you speak, but I guess I don't know how one fulfills one's responsibility to history, because you can name the offices, but the hard thing is to say what it was like to be there, and why it worked, and why it all came together, and I guess I guess one way of getting at that would be, where were you in this story? How did your story intersect with that building?
Well, I was a bit player. I was proud to be able to get my byline in 100 Flowers a couple of times. And as often as not, I didn't write something, I helped lay it out. As a sidebar, this is where I really learned how to write. One of the other things that came out of that 539 theater was what was called Scoop magazine. It's now morphed into some other, but very well respected inter-co-op magazine. A guy named Dave Gutenek is somebody who would be a good interview. I don't know if he's going to be there Sunday or not. He taught me how to write. I'd just sort of write some stuff down about this and think it was going to get published. And he said, no, this is a bad sentence. No, you got to rewrite this. No, you use this word twice in the same sentence. You can't do it. I learned how to write working for 100 Flowers virtually after I'd finished college, just because a friend didn't want sort of imperfect paragraphs to go out in this newspaper that, whoever saw it again. So how do I fit in this? I was an activist. How did I get into activism? It was by chance, and of course because of events beyond my control. I came out of St. Paul, not far from here, Midway. I came from the middle of a middle-sized, middle-class family in the middle of a mid-sized city in the middle of the Midwest. It's totally that. The third kid in the Catholic family in the heart of St. Paul. I went to the University of Minnesota, and I was a wide-eyed innocent. It's like I was in Istanbul or Mumbai or someplace. Minneapolis was just, I was a kid in the candy store. I signed up for everything, including a fraternity, including student projects for international responsibility. I'd never known anybody from overseas. And freshman cabinet, which put me into student government. Mm-hmm. And I'd never done that in high school. I was sort of a slug. The only thing I did in high school was start a ski club. But that got me into student government. And I kept doing things. I ended up as the treasurer of student government. And this was a heck of a time to be in student government. Because, it's just a couple of years before, the free speech movement had happened in Berkeley. And so campus was sort of a place to be. The sexual revolution was coming along. It was a fun time to be involved in that. And when we started, the student power movement was ascendant. And when we started in 1965, there wasn't a student in the University Senate, wasn't a Senate on any university governing bodies by the time we finished. and we'll take credit for this. And I will give credit to Tom Gilsonen and Joe Kroll and some of the other people who were sort of above me in the hierarchy. We got students on all the university governing bodies. The profile of university governments totally changed during the time we were on campus, and I'll take a little bit of credit for that. I ended up being the vice president of the student body of Minnesota Student Association because I was in the newspaper much more than the president, Tom Gilson. A lot of people thought I was the president, but I wasn't. But all of these, many of these sort of things going on campus needed or wanted a representative of student government on them. And because some of the people above me in the hierarchy, Tom and Joe, were very interested in student power stuff, and that was a full-time job, I got to be the student representative for what we called ecology, the first organizing meetings for the first Earth Day. I was student representative. I became student representative for what became for the statewide anti-war organizing body called the New Mobilization Committee to End the War in Vietnam, the New Mo. And because I was interested in it, I got to go to it. And because I'm sort of a guy, I get along with everybody, and people sort of trusted me, and I didn't come in with this old red diaper baby agenda of having the world all figured out. All of a sudden, I'm co-chairman of the state New Mobilization Committee, the state umbrella organization for the anti-war movement. I'm chairing meetings with the most remarkable groups of people. I mean, you got the Quakers over here, and the Gentle Ladies from Friendship or Reconciliation over here, and the Lutherans over there, and the Black Panthers over here, and the Students for a Democratic Society who wanted to burn it all down, and then the lefties of this SDS who thought the other parts of SDS were too moderate. We had some hellfire meetings that you've had enough time, now you get your time. It was just sort of, I think I just sort of applied ideas of fundamental fairness that I grew up with living in a family, as a middle kid. And the first plane trip I ever took was to an anti-war organizing meeting in Philadelphia. I mean, here am I, this kid from St. Paul. I've never been in a plane before. I'm going as a Minnesota representative to this national organizing event. I don't want to claim I made a big contribution to any of this stuff. I was just there. I observed. Did I talk a couple of times? I don't remember. But it was funny because I finally got my FBI file. I learned about all sorts of crap I'd done or relearned that I'd forgotten about completely. I went to anti-war organizing meetings in Milwaukee. I didn't remember. I'd been to Ann Arbor for anti-war. I'd done all these things and I'd forgotten about them. And so, because I was a wide-eyed innocent in 1965 and signed up for freshman cabinet, and because all these events were going on, I volunteered to go to meetings. And all of a sudden, for the anti-war movement, I'm chairing meetings, right? For the civil rights, all right? So the black students, they were, in 1969, University of Minnesota is the biggest single campus in the country. Bigger systems, Texas, New York, California. But there was not a bigger single campus than Minneapolis-St. Paul campus. 40 to 50,000 students. 80-some black students, counting the athletes. That was it. 80-some. And so, because I'm in student government, we have some contact. Because the black students hung out at Kaufman Union, we had a little contact. And Kaufman Union was, of course, where the student government offices were. Another advantage of having, for all these groups, ecology, et cetera, of having somebody from student government on their board was that I could get rooms for free. When you got sort of get in. So it helped just to organize. You got a room to meet. In any case, in January of 1969, the African American Action Committee, after having gone through 2 or 3 years of politely petitioning the university administration for more scholarships, for more affirmative action and stuff, finally just sat in at the bursar's office at Morrill Hall. And because I'm in student government, I knew about it. So I got to be over there in Morrill Hall as the African American Action Committee sat in at the bursar's office. I got to be then on the committee, the university ad hoc committee to investigate what happened at Morrill Hall. And then the county attorney indicted 3 of the leaders of the African American Action Committee, and so of course I'm going to the meetings. And I become the treasurer of the Liberation Coalition. What am I doing? Yeah, we didn't raise much money, but so it's sort of by happenstance I fell into these things. I mean, I chose to be there. I wanted to be part of the civil rights movement, but I had unparalleled opportunities to get into it just by circumstance. And I still have dear friends to this day that I met on the lines of the Liberation Coalition. It was one of those events where the indictment of these students did what nobody else could have done. It united black and white students, made us get to know each other. I'm still friends to this day with Rosemary Freeman, the tall, scary woman who was president of the African American Action Committee, and the white and black community on campus, and the campus and the North Minneapolis community. There would never have been a reason for any of these entities to sort of get to know each other, but for those historical events. And I was privileged to be in the middle of it, and therefore went downtown a lot. We had a lot of marches. Would start at Northrop, would start at Kaufman, and end up down at the Federal Building or whatever. In fact, so I'm jumping around now. Those were heady times. 1969 was Woodstock. Right? So early 69, that was a hell of a year. The African American Action Committee took over the bursar's office in Morrill Hall. It was one of the most sensible, successful organizing events in the country. They didn't take over the whole building. They didn't do the Columbia thing and sit in the president's chair and smoke cigars. They just took over the bursar's office. They let the university administration have its offices upstairs. They didn't let the white students into the bursar's office. It was just the black students, and the white students, we stood outside, right? Sort of in the building, but outside the bursar's office. They did a little, there's some hotheads that, broke a desk or something, but they didn't really destroy anything, and they got out after a day. And they got faculty members on their side. They got in, they got out. They didn't alienate, they didn't ruin, they didn't take over the president's office, and they got what they wanted. They got an African American African Studies department that year. I mean, it was a fantastic. I'm proud to be friends with Rosemary Freeman and Horace Huntley and John Wright and the people that were the leaders of that organization. And to their credit, almost every one of them became a university professor. I mean, these people they walked the talk. John Wright was there. He could have written his ticket. He was in IT and left IT. To become an African American Studies major and professor, and he's now emeritus at the university. Rose Freeman taught for her entire career at Milwaukee Area Technical College in the heart of Milwaukee, teaching poor students. And Horace Huntley went back to Birmingham, Alabama, which was where he was from. And became a college professor, and he's emeritus down there. I mean, I could list others. I'm still buddies with John Senar. He works with Save Our Sons in St. Paul. So I'm just free associated. There's so much events. I mean, you'd catch anybody who was around in those days. And then there was Woodstock, and I got introduced to LSD by the same woman I took to Woodstock, and those were heady times, and those were good times. Where can I free associate? I got to get out one of my proudest moments was in October of 1969. There was a sort of a two-phase anti-war effort. October moratorium, October 15th, and the November moratorium, November 15th, 1969. The October moratorium around the country were local actions designed to sort of have demonstrations in as many places as possible. Hopefully as funneling then to the national demonstration in Washington, D.C. in November of '69. And we had a tremendous organization here. We always had good anti-war sentiment in Minnesota, good turnouts for our demonstrations. And I forget, I'm sure we walked from campus down to the old federal building. That was sort of the standard routine. You know, there's lots of speechifying and stuff, and the details of the event I can't remember. I can't remember if I gave a speech. Oftentimes I didn't give a speech, but I got to run the mic because I was student government, and I got along with people, and, you know, and whatever. I didn't have any. But then I don't even know how word leaked back. But this was an era where, you know, Madison had not burned down, but there'd been, you know, trashing was sort of the heartfelt way that the vulgar left sort of showed how vigorous was their feeling, and the revolution was manifest by being militant that way, right? And we always, you know, we don't want that, you know, you guys, I'll tell you about the Sunshine Collective. But in any case, we didn't have that. I don't know how the word got back, but after this magnificent crowd came and went on October 15th, I got word that there were a couple hundred people down on the mall that were pissed, that were sort of the surging crowd around. That, and I knew some of them, and they were crazy. I don't know if they're provocateurs or just crazy, but they were the kind that wanted to create a confrontation with the police. And we had Charlie Stenbig, I can't remember if he was chief of police then or mayor, but he was a very law and order guy who was sort of looking for confrontation. And I could just see that becoming the headline. Instead of this magnificent peaceful organizing thing being the headline, it was going to be three guys or 30 or 300 who surged around the mall, intimidating old ladies and breaking windows. And so I went down to the mall and just started yelling at people. You can't do this. You're not going to do this. I'm a big, loud guy. And I just started telling people, you can't do this. You're not going to do this. Go back to campus. You got to go to the bar. I can't remember what I said. I just sort of yelled at it. You could tell who were the hippies, who were the anti-war people. And I just said, it's time, the demonstration's over. Go, leave, boom, 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 boom. And I succeeded. They all left. They all ended. I even only remember that it happened because I didn't even know about it, but a reporter for the Star Tribune followed me, a guy named Dave Kuhn. So somewhere I have a very dog-eared and faded, like, 6th generation photocopy of a newspaper article that was in the Star Tribune, or the Star or the Tribune, they were both in it, from October 16th, 1969, which was my birthday, about that event. He followed me, and you know, I just, you know, the main headline was the demonstration, but a sidebar story was that. And so, you know, people know me because I'm a felon. People know me for other events, but that's one of the things I'm most proud of, because that's what I saw myself as an organizer that sort of wanted everybody to get along. I still want everybody to get along. Even though Arab Trump, I still believe we have more in common than we have differences with people. But so if I may brag to your camera, that's one of my proudest events. I get teased about being the person who kept the campus quiet during whatever, the revolution or the anti-war movement. I did at least keep the mall quiet on October 15th, 1969. And there were similar events on campus that every now and then you just said, I had to throw cold water on the crazies. During the student strike, what we did, the student strike after the invasion of Cambodia, and then many campuses went on strike. This would be now 1970, May of 1970. It was a very organic thing. You know, it was successful beyond our belief. Oh, one of the best speeches I gave during that was after about 8,000 people gathered in front of campus and voted to go on strike. We had Mulford Sibley, sainted professor, give a speech and whatever. Then, okay, we're on strike. What do you do now? we hadn't planned it. What are we doing? What do you want to do? I don't know. And so SDF got a surge of several hundred people to go to Morrill Hall, the administration building on campus. I just feel they'd always resented that the black students hadn't let them into the inner sanctum during the occupation in January of '69. And they always sort of wanted to repeat that to prove their militancy. And so I remember just watching that happen. Let's go to Morrill Hall. We're going to go to Morrill Hall. So these people, I knew them, and they weren't evil people. They were just stupid. And so hundreds of people surged into Morrill Hall. And one of the best speeches I ever gave was in the stairwell of Morrill Hall. Sort of the backstory is, well, we got to have some locus, right? And so I didn't hate, our university president, Malcolm Moose, was the poor guy who had to deal with the African American Action Committee and that occupation. He had to deal with the anti-war movement. I got arrested blocking entrances to his building reluctantly. But he wasn't a bad man. He was a good man. He wrote Eisenhower's military-industrial complex speech warning the country that the corporations and the military are joining forces to sort of dissipate your democracy. In any case, I forget who we were. We sort of realized if we're going to take over a building, let's take over Kaufman Union, the student union. Why the administration building? They don't have food facilities. They got crappy bathrooms. This is the center of the university. They do need to go to their offices. And so the speech I gave to hundreds of people, or however many people fit into the hallway, or the staircase of Morrill Hall, was, what are we here for? The university administration is not our enemy. Our enemy is the Nixon administration, not the university administration. Mm-hmm. And why do we want to take over this building? Let's go to Kaufman Union. Come on, let's take over Kaufman Union. So even the virulent crazy sort of, you can get their dander up because they get to take over something. and so that's one of the prouder speeches. You got two of my proudest speeches were just impromptu yelling at the crowd, steering them in a different direction.
Yeah, well, I've got one beatitude down and how many to go. Blessed are the peacemakers, translates to pour water on the crazies. Got that clear.
I was free to associate. I was reminded of that because what do you do with the crazies? During the student strike, it was magnificent in some ways, and a bit flaccid in others. But how do you organize things, right? Because we ended up with a faculty committee for this. It was all organic. It was all sort of whimsical and ad hoc. We had a high school organizing committee because somebody came to a meeting and says, we should be organizing high schools. We'd say, okay, you're the high school organizing committee, right? I mean, this is literally, that's how it happened. We need a neighborhood organizing committee. Okay, you're in charge of the neighborhoods. We need someone to contact, the way community. Okay, you're in charge. That's how it happened. But one of the things that sort of got created in that same way is what we call the Sunshine Collective. Because there's always, especially back then, the stoners, the stoners, the West Bank stoners, they're just a little bit loopy. Or the well-meaning political people who did a little too much LSD or whatever. But we had the Sunshine Collective. So anybody who was a little loopy, and this included a number of Vietnam vets, because there were some very tough, well-meaning, spirited people who were difficult to direct. And they just needed a place to expend their energy and feel part of the movement. And they became the Sunshine Collective. And so it was okay. Somebody sort of wanted to get stoned. Where's the Sunshine Collective guys? Seymour, you're part of the Sunshine Collective. Here, take care of Ralph. And, they disappear for a couple of days.
Well, I mean, we did a show. First one I did with Nor was Arvon Fraser talking about the chemistry of, Humphrey Mondale, Fraser, and the working class folks and the academic folks all living in cheap mouse-infested housing in the strip along Dinkytown.
Right.
And I mean, the thing that hit me was progressive America came out of that. Not only the ideas, but it was the right training ground for people to go on, to keep working in the same vein for quite a long time.
Well, you've listed some prominent names of people who got stuff done.
And it sounds like the West Bank had something similar happening, and sort of the university and West Bank had also an atmosphere, a mix of people, a mix of strategies, something that had the effect of making a lot of what they were fussing about permanent, and making a lot of the people who got into it by backing into lifelong activists.
Well, they were centers of the movement, and if you try to define the movement, that would be pretty tough to do. But it's like art, I don't know how to define it, but I know when I see it.
What I'm interested in vitally, because it's got to be the secret of how this country can work, is what do you need? What sorts of things do you need to make that kind of center be the sort of thing that's absurdly creative and absurdly long-lasting and not, a fireworks display? And you've been talking about one aspect of that, which is keeping it nonviolent and finding a way to handle the mentally ill people and the disturbed people and the intoxicated people who find their way into any public movement, presumably were around at the American Revolution, where they probably also had a Ye Old Sunshine Club, where they served particularly strong ale.
You got that right.
I mean, I'm sure this is so, but I guess since you broach it, I'm interested if you remember anything else. I mean, you seem to have had a real part in keeping it from going south at a few points in its history, this movement, this thing. Did you remember anything else about what it was that worked as a kind of save for this movement, that somehow or other pushed it in the direction of goodness and prosperity and the long haul, and away from just a bunch of people screaming and throwing things?
Speakers Committee, I guess. I one of the committees that I was active in, Speakers Committee. I mean, how do you get the word out? You have to get the word out. Right? One of the reasons we have a progressive community that fondly remembers those days is because we gave more speeches. I gave more speeches to high school social studies classes and religion classes and in church basements and stuff. I do think that we did some good grassroots organizing and educating. We always had teach outs. They always seemed a little flaccid to me. Because we always, speaking of the choir, we're going to have a teach out in Palestine. The only people that show up are a few, Palestinians, Jews, and other lefties that already have an opinion. But our ability to go out into the community and talk about these issues was I think, positive, very positive in the long run.
Was Vance Opperman in that?
He was, I can't claim to have really known him. He was that much older.
Oh,
And I think he'd become a lawyer and was differently involved. And one of the weaknesses of this movement was that it rejected electoral politics. And now it didn't completely, because one of the first sort of lefty things I did was sit at a McCarthy table. And I was sort of a vague McCarthy supporter. It's sort of funny, the guy who got me there was a guy named Pat Fallon, who started the famous Fallon McElliott advertising agency, became a very conservative Republican. But he was a fraternity brother, he got me to him. But a lot of that movement, especially after McGovern didn't get the nomination, and Robert Kennedy was assassinated, we rejected electoral politics, and I think that was foolish. So that was one of the weaknesses. But what was I heard your question is
say more about the Speakers Committee. That you were saying that was a pretty important answer to what Peter was asking.
Okay, well, thank you. I was distracting
maybe.
myself. What was I saying? I can hardly wait to hear what I have to say next. So I think that was one of our successes. That was one of our strengths. We realized you got to get out there. And the high school committee was basically a speakers committee, but we had a fundamental speakers committee. I sometimes blame those speeches on why I became a felon. Because I was, like many people, like I said, giving speeches on a regular basis. You get confronted then. Well, what do you think about this? What do you think about sitting in the streets? What do you think about burning the flag? What do you think about fighting with police? What do you think about raiding draft boards? And so raiding draft boards was one that I had a struggle with. Because, I'm a nice middle class kid from St. Paul. I don't break the law, right? And I wasn't going to resist the draft. I was gonna go into the army. I'm not a pacifist. I always thought I could go in the army and maybe organize, but I wasn't going to go to jail because I wasn't a pacifist. So I'm not answering your question. I'm giving a personal sidebar. I finally got to answer all these questions. What do you think of draft board raids? Draft board raids were people who were going into offices. The selective service system was the paper system that kept names of young men. As they became 18, they were recorded, and if they didn't have a draft exemption, like for health or for being a student or whatever, then they were eligible to be drafted. And it was the system that provided the fodder for the war machine. And so there was an organic movement around the country where people just on their own, not with direction from anybody, but just on their own, were going into these offices and removing and destroying the records. Sometimes they did it publicly. The Berrigan brothers got famous as the Milwaukee 14 for taking them out in the middle of the day and pouring blood on them or gas on them and stuff. So I got asked these questions. What do you think of it? And because I could explain why people would burn the flag, but I never said I could support it. Right? I could see why you want to do it, but I'm not going to do it myself. I finally decided that raiding a draft board is a peaceful way, nonviolent way, to actually throw sand in the war machine, to actually resist the military-industrial complex in an appropriate way. And of course, back then, if you support it, you got to do it. You are what you do. You remember those times. And so once I decided, and there was sort of a cusp in early 1970 when I sort of made that decision after giving speech after speech after speech throughout 1969 and be facing these questions that, well, crap, I guess I better do it. And so I sort of knew just for other things, who was involved, who'd done these things before, and I just told them, next time I want in, because I am what I do. I am what I can't. I got to do what I say. And there were a couple of false starts. There was one very funny event in Detroit where it was an aborted event. Just a funny story. In any case, in July of 1970, I was just a bit player in draft board raid things. I was an above ground organizer 99.9% of the time. I was a soldier in this sabotage of the war machine, and we got arrested. And so that is one reason that people still look to me today for my opinion, because we became a cause celeb. We became famous, the Minnesota 8. So the rest is history. All of a sudden, Tilton's known for raiding a draft board. I've had friends say, didn't you burn up a draft board? Didn't you blow up a draft board? We didn't do any of those sorts of things. We wanted to just remove and feed to the Mississippi these records. Anyway, but the speechifying was I think very healthy. I think it was very good. It's very funny. Still get teased today. A dear friend of mine is the Chief Justice of the Minnesota Court of Appeals, Ed Cleary. I got him in trouble because he invited me, because he knew my roommate. He invited me to Cretin High School, my old alma mater, Catholic all-male military at the time, to speak at a social studies class. And of course, I, without thinking, brought anti-war and probably anti-ROTC literature. So this poor Ed Cleary, future Chief Justice of the Court of Appeals, gets in trouble because he's invited this weirdo Tilton, this alumni, into class. But we got to talk to the young impressionable minds. I remember Our Lady of Peace High School was a big Catholic school in the heart of St. Paul. It's now the site of William Mitchell College of Law. But I got to speak to an all-school assembly at OLP. I dated girls from OLP. This was just like the sexiest event you could have just by a guy, some college students sitting in front of a Catholic girls' school. So we're jumping around, but returning to the subject of speechifying, we were able to talk to a lot of people, and we were right. It helps that we were right, and so I do think that we succeeded a lot in helping convince the country that we were right and that the country was in a wrong direction.
One of your jobs, one of the roles you played early on, was to keep these demonstrations, among other things, legal.
Yeah.
And it was with great reluctance that you crossed the line to illegal activity. And then you went to law school, and you've been, in a certain way, working within the system. And I guess my question is just as nutty as, what do you think of legality these days?
Well, I think it's very important. Does that mean that you could never justify breaking the law? No. But I think obeying the law is important. I think demonstrations should make every effort to obey the law. I have friends that were blocking Interstate 94 not long ago. I don't support it. I don't. I think that people ought to be able to drive down 94 regardless of whether a cop shot somebody. So obviously I broke the law, and I paid the price, and I'll wear it on my sleeve with pride. I learned a lot in prison. I came out much stronger than the people who didn't go. But in general, we live in a constitutional democracy where change will come only fundamentally through the ballot box. It doesn't mean that civil disobedience is irrelevant. And so for those people who choose to get arrested whether it's blocking the entrance to a senator's office or blocking a roadway, as a lawyer, I'll represent them.